Let's get into the news. Okay, so it's been a little bit of time since we last spoke. A lot has transpired since then, and one of them being the liberation of Canada from Justin Trudeau after sort of invoking more or less a martial law on the truckers and then backing away from that about a week or so ago. But today we're going to be spending the entire time, for the most part, talking about a little bit of foreign affairs because we have to talk about Vladimir Putin and what's happening right now between Russia and Ukraine. And I just wanted to give you all a rundown just from my perspective, and we'll see how it connects to the culture war. So look, generally speaking, I tend to defer to authorities on stuff or people who are in the know and have been studying this stuff for a while before I begin to opine. So I started reading this thread by Josh Hammer. So he's with Newsweek. Pretty good guy. Tends to get a lot of information right. Seems to be in the know about things, and gives a pretty level-headed assessment on Twitter. Just kind of a thread about the crisis. And one of the things that he says in this long thread here is, "Hey, this is not the beginning of World War III. People, get a hold of yourself." So I was like, okay, good. All right. So the smart guy, person who's well read, is saying, let's calm down. We're probably fine. No global conflict kind of approaching here. And then I recently read about Ukraine and Russia and Russian negotiators agreeing to hold talks in Belarus. So that's like a pretty positive sign as well. We've seen a lot of conflict and reports of conflict between these two countries recently. And if they were trying to have peace talks, and these were supposed to be without preconditions, that was a good sign. And I was beginning to calm down, right? However, over the weekend, things kind of changed. And that's because I read this transcript of Vladimir Putin's televised address to Ukraine. And this started to really change my direction. Like, I was actually not going to really talk about Russia and Ukraine today. But as I began to start digging into it more and more, and starting with the speech, I was really surprised. And I thought this is actually way more serious than I thought it was. So why was this so shocking? I was thinking that Putin was going to spend this entire speech just going in on like Ukraine. Sort of a regional conflict, maybe, over a border issue or kind of political alignment issue, or maybe natural resource issue. You've heard a lot about the natural resources of Ukraine probably. But he spends like 90% of this speech, and I won't read it to you now, talking about the West and talking about the United States and talking about NATO and Europe and their aggression and hostilities over the years. And he talks about his patience. Like, over the last 30 years, we've been patiently trying to come to an agreement with these NATO countries, right? He's lamenting over the fall of the Soviet Union and the, let's say, weak negotiating position that put Russia in subsequently, right, to almost get bullied by and deceived and sort of hoodwinked, by Western powers over many decades. And he basically calls them, liars. I think he has this sort of lies and hypocrisy. I think he calls the United States the empire of lies. And I was shocked, honestly, because this is not about Ukraine fundamentally. Ukraine is just the latest example of the broader conflict that Putin has with the West in general, due to what he perceives as being its sort of lies, incursion, deception. He particularly talks about the border. So he's talking about NATO basically encroaching on Russia's borders, getting closer and closer, setting up different installments. I didn't even know about this. I'm not a foreign policy guy per se, but that's a problem. I haven't heard any of these mainstream media news talks about this. So when I started reading about this, I was thinking to myself, okay, this has the potential to get out of control very, very fast, because he's not just talking about, one country, Ukraine, at which point, hey, this could probably be over in a few weeks. He's talking about the entire Western world. And then, to make matters worse, I began to hear a lot about sort of like fake news and propaganda. So over this past week or so, we've been hearing a lot of like, let's say, discredited or at least brought into question news stories. And so one of them is this Ghost of Kiev. So, there was supposed to be this hotshot pilot who's, taken down or took down like 6 Russian planes all by himself, legendary stuff. He's an ace pilot. Turns out the footage from this particular clip was from a video game, apparently. So it wasn't an actual real clip. There was talks about the ghost of, it's the Snake Island incident, where apparently, there was a report in which, the Ukrainian soldiers, said, F you to the Russian sort of attackers or aggressors there, and all got wiped out. And apparently there was a discredited story on that now that's showing that they were just captured, right? And then you go to this really, really good thread here by the Conservative Treehouse, and they say one of the things that came to mind with me, which is the first casualty of war is the truth. And they sort of unpack this sort of propaganda. And to be fair, there's propaganda on both sides, no doubt about it, right? Russia has its own propaganda, I'm sure. But one of the things that we're kind of not really talking about is the West/Ukraine bloc is also pushing propaganda. So there was this picture about, the Ukraine president fighting on the front lines, and people are discrediting that. If I can zoom in just a little bit here, apparently this was from 2021. So he was apparently inspecting the border. So they use apparently. And again, none of this is confirmed by me. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a guy who reads the news and tries to interpret it. So imagine. So what this is saying is that these pictures of him fighting on the front lines, apparently, in this past week, is actually showing that he was just These are leveraged or lifted pictures from him inspecting the border back in 2021. Oh, that's crazy. And then there's more to it here. Right, you have someone like Adam Kinzinger, and we'll come back to him in a minute. He's out here talking about, oh man, look at the poor innocent Ukrainian children and the brave soldiers who are fighting for their country. And apparently that is a picture from 2016, right? So this is a psyop. This is warfare, right? This is information warfare. And in my mind, you only need information warfare when you expect something to be a long-term and organized effort. You don't need a lot of information warfare for short little skirmishes that last for a few weeks or maybe even a few months. That's not as critical. So this got me thinking and a little bit worried, right? Because why would someone work so hard to push this much propaganda and deception and lies, right? Ghost of Kiev, the Ukrainians are so cool. Give money to Ukraine, the president is so badass, right? Out here on the front lines. Protect the kids. We have to, go after the kids. It's all meant to psychologically and emotionally manipulate people. So that got me a little bit worried. We're seeing it here in the United States, right? Everything is about disinformation and misinformation. Why is that? It's because we're at war internally, right? And so one of the hallmarks of war is disinformation and misinformation and propaganda. So that was worrying. And then I began to see other stuff. So you have this headline here. The Biden administration is sending $350 million in military assistance to Ukraine. So this validates the point from Putin, which is that this is not about Russia versus Ukraine, not at all. This is about Russia versus the United States and NATO in conjunction. And it's not looking good for Russia. Obviously, they're outnumbered dramatically, right? So this $350 million caps off $1 billion in the past year, and that the U.S. has committed to Ukraine. So really, we're just seeing a proxy war, right? This is simply a proxy war, being executed on Ukraine soil between the West and Russia. And then it continues to get even worse, right? So over the weekend, Putin warned of his people to be ready for a nuclear deterrent readiness as Ukraine's tensions rise, right? He was like, be on alert. Be on alert. We are entering into our, I think it's now 5th or so day of conflict. Be on high alert. Okay, as the fighting between these two countries continues. So that's a problem. You're 4 or 5 days in, and we're talking about nuclear weaponry already, right? Um, Typically, again, you wouldn't necessarily need that level of power against, like a regional conflict. You know what I mean? Like that's an escalation. And then this really screwed my mind up here. So the same place, Belarus, where they're supposed to be having these peace talks, is now revoking its non-nuclear status and paving the way apparently for Russian nuclear weapons in the country. So this is a head scratcher. So if you're supposed to be a neutral party, right, a non-combatant, why would you pass a constitutional referendum to basically make yourself a nuclear power again? And you're already allied, I guess, with Russia. So what does that really mean, right? You combine this with the over the weekend sort of nuclear deterrent comment from Putin. And it just seems weird that you would even like, what's the point of having these conversations, right? Or these negotiations if at the same time you're 100% mobilizing for what appears to be total warfare. And then it got even worse. So one of the things that Tim Pool has talked about quite a bit is how much of a, let's say, financially nuclear option it is to cut off Russia from the SWIFT banking system. And this basically completely destabilizes their, Russia's entire financial system and banking system immediately, which is a catastrophe, right? And Putin has stressed that, look, if you do these financial sanctions like this, that would effectively be an act of war. And by the way, the U.S. has already talked about cybersecurity, right? Cyber hacking against Russia, just openly saying that. And one of the, let's say, financial nuclear options has been just over the weekend again, the cutting off, or at least the beginning of the cutting off from of Russian banks from the SWIFT system. It's important to note that this is not all banks. Apparently, this is just like some of the big ones here. But you have all these pictures of people, withdrawing all their money, right? Huge lines, with as Russian citizens go and sort of withdraw all their money from the banking system. And this is confirmed, by the way, right? So we have this joint statement from the EU against Russia and says, hey, we commit to ensuring that selected Russian banks are removed from the SWIFT messaging system. This will ensure that these banks are disconnected from the international financial system and harm their ability to operate globally. Wow. And they're taking measures against Russia's central bank. So this is pretty huge, right? This is part of what Tim Pool has been ranting about a lot, him and his guys, in terms of the SWIFT payment system being a massive component for just financial stability. So we're really escalating on this fast, right? I mean, this is just crazy. And then you talk about this. This happened, I think, on February 25th. We had the U.S. government basically come out and say, hey, in the event of a nuclear fallout, here are the actions that Americans should take to, protect themselves, to guard themselves. Stay inside, stay tuned, make some preparations, find a shelter, get inside, close doors, try to be in brick if you can. Make sure you're clean and not around contaminated, clothing and such. So what the heck is going on, right? I mean, it seems as if they're trying to prime people towards war, right? This was last updated, 25th, not too long ago. So yeah. So I'm seeing all the writing on the wall that suggests that this is not a small regional skirmish by any means, right? And check it out. The EU, in addition to moving forward on removing Russia from the SWIFT system, they're providing about 500 million euros worth of fighter jets, apparently, to Ukraine. So this is a war. You're giving arms. You're giving fighter jets. Excuse me. You're cutting them off from the banking system. Right. There's already a deplatforming happening right now where Russian outlets and media companies are being kicked off of Facebook and demonetized and such, which means going forward in this information warfare, we will only see half of the story. Right. So we'll see a lot of pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia propaganda going forward, but not the other way around. Most likely, it'll be hard for Russia, to give any propaganda on its side, for the the global community to kind of assess and take sides. So massive problem here. And then I want to bring it home a little bit, right? Because this is not just an isolated, Russia situation. There was this poll that came out not too long ago here saying that Democrats prefer defending Ukrainians over protecting the American border. So this was a pretty shocking one here. So you have the data here at the bottom. We see a pretty healthy split between Republicans and Democrats. 74% of Republicans say we have to protect the border against illegal immigration. 57% of Democrats say defending Ukraine against the Russian invasion is the most important thing. More so than protecting the border. Crazy times, right? Crazy times that we're living in right now. And part of this is part of the course. I mean, when you really think about it, what is the first thing they call Trump? Right. One of them was he was an asset for Putin. Right. Any information that comes out like that is, anti-Biden or pro-Trump, it's affiliated with Moscow. Right. What did they say when the news came out about Hunter Biden? Right. And his laptop. Oh, they were like, oh, this has all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And that was a statement put out by the joint sort of intelligence community, right? So it's one of those things where they've been priming the Democrats for at least like 7 or so years, right, constantly, to be almost primed for war with Russia. So I wouldn't be surprised if it actually gets to that point. What happens, right, when you say Russia, stole the 2016 election and installed Donald Trump, who's been a fascist dictator and puppet for the Russian government. What happens when you have these crazy warlike accusations, which are demonstrably false, but they're believable by the Dems, who are often tribalists, right, and willing to take sides regardless of facts and data. So now they've been mentally primed, right, to be ready to defend Ukraine, consider it as part of NATO or the West, and to expend all resources, right, wasting our blood and sweat and money for this. And you have a pretty prominent kind of scumbag Democrat. I really don't like this guy in particular. He's a traitor to the country because of the whole Fang-ish incident. Again, I don't know how justice works in this country. Like this dude is literally, with the communists here, and he's still like in power. Anyway, so he issued kind of an interesting statement over the weekend, which is, hey, we should probably kick out Russian students from the United States, and you should probably just close the embassy in the U.S. That's escalation. That's warfare, right? That's getting into Japanese detainment center territory. That's getting into what back in my day when I was like more on the left. What the Republicans used to say about like people from the Middle East, and what some of them even still say a little bit, or at least imply around, Chinese students studying in the U.S. Now the fascists, now the authoritarians, now the scaremongers, right? Now the belligerents are coming from the left, and now he's like, yo, we should kick these guys out of the U.S. Really, really strong language from Mr. Swalwell here. It continues, right? So there's another kind of related story, just bringing this home on the domestic front again. It kind of went under the radar, but Andy No really highlighted it well here. And journalists were spreading a hoax that Proud Boys were sending fighters to help Russia. So why is this important? This was all a troll account. This was all fake, fake news. It wasn't serious, but the Associated Free Press, they ran with it, right? You have New York Times, right? Shira Frankel, ran with it, put it onto print, and Andy just lights him up. He's just such a professional. They have spread the misinformation, these journalists, that Proud Boys are traveling to Eastern Europe to join the war. New York Times, The Guardian, MSNBC, right? So going back to this whole commentary around propaganda, it's a real thing because, again, you're seeing this association between the quote unquote right and Vladimir Putin, right? It's almost like chocolate chip. If I say chocolate chip, what do you think? You think cookies or you think ice cream. Why? Because nobody goes to the store and just buys chocolate chips and then just pops them into their mouth. That's not how it works. Those are key ingredients that every single interaction, every single communication in your life has always associated with cookies or with ice cream, right? So it's the same thing here. If I say Proud Boys, you think Trump and you think Russia. It's an association game, so that they've professionally and thoroughly ingrained this association game in our minds for the past 7 or so years, such that anything that even seems to validate the Proud Boys, going and fighting for Russia, I mean, they're just going to pounce on it. They're gonna eat this and gobble it up and make it into a talking point. Compare January 6th, right, to what happened and what is happening right now in Ukraine. So really, really interesting kind of point of connection here. These people didn't, to my knowledge, issue a retraction or issue an apology. Yet you have a troll tweet from an account with 10 followers that made it into all these major news outlets, because that's the other war, right? It's not just a hot war, right, between Russia and Ukraine. We have a cold war, a soft war, an information war, whatever you want to call it here, right here at home. And it gets dark. It gets really grim, right? So we also had over the weekend a January 6th defendant. His name is Matthew Perna, who apparently offed himself. And this was specifically coming on the heels of additional charges, right, that the U.S. government were going to make against him, right? So they informed him the other day that they were pursuing additional charges. He could not take another day. And what was his charge? He spent about 20 minutes, right, inside the Capitol as police opened the doors and ushered protesters in. He was not accused of vandalism or any other violent crime, simply trespassing related offenses, right? Still, these guys, and this is a little bit of editorializing by National File, have been ruthlessly prosecuted by the Biden regime, while BLM riders have received lesser sentences if they are even convicted, right? And Brandon Straka kind of relates and gives his condolences because he went through a similar circumstance. Brandon did. He was like completely missing in action for like a year, being persecuted by the government. Thankfully, he did not off himself as Matt Perna did, but I'm sure it crossed his mind. And this is crazy because if you recall, Putin last year was actually talking about the January 6th defendants and how they were being treated. Now, again, this is the pot calling the kettle black here, right? Because protesters don't get treated that well in Russia. But at the same time, this is clear-eyed criticism of the West, right? Here you have a non-violent dude who walks into the Capitol for 20 minutes, doesn't break or do anything, and the government persecutes him so hard in the United States that he decides it's better for him to just end his life, right? That's craziness. That's absolute madness, right? This is their goal. The left will never mourn this. This is actually something for them to cheer on because we're at war. They want Osama bin Laden to off himself. They want, whoever their opponent or enemy of the day is to off. They will love if Vladimir Putin, takes a poison pill like Hitler did apparently, or rumor too. Like they would like this, right? Because we're their enemies. Anybody who's on the right, anybody who does not follow the regime, anybody who they can associate through their word games as being violent T-cell extremists, they will persecute and try to destroy. And so this poor guy took his own life, and I don't think he's the only one, by the way. There's been several kind of similar incidents, which brings us back to the current day, which is that going back to the truckers now. So we're switching gears from Canada to the United States, right? So the thing that I've been sort of implying and alluding to for, I guess, months now at this point, the U.S. trucker convoy is really a thing. And so it looks like there's going to be an interesting week ahead where the truckers are slated to arrive in D.C. around the same time that Joe Biden gives his State of the Union address, which is going to be March the 1st. So imagine he'll say, it's rumored that he'll say, hey, coup restrictions are being lifted because we, defeated the virus. And he'll probably share some comments around the whole Russia-Ukraine situation and, protecting liberty, protecting democracy at all costs, some BS like that. But anyway, it's going to be an interesting dynamic, right? Because these truckers are going to face heavy security, super, buffed up security. I think they're going to be lifting the gates up and having little checkpoints and borders again, similar to how they did in the aftermath of January 6th, when they spent, months basically, putting up a security state and having, snipers and gunners and machine guns and all the rest, ready to unload on, protesters. So they'll probably have somewhat of a similar situation here, but it definitely will be an interesting week ahead. And it just goes to show, like, look, the right is next on the chopping block, right? I don't love Putin, but I can understand where he's coming from, having read his speech. And the left regime, if you can even call it the left, this is neo-lib establishment. They've grouped us all together, right? And Ukraine is kind of like the, let's say, the political version of Epstein Island. I think that all of the Western leaders have some dirt in Ukraine. There's pictures of, files and papers being burned, for example, by Ukraine soldiers. We have that infamous 10% for the big guy statement as it pertains to Biden. I think there's a lot of dirt related to Western leaders in Ukraine that may come to surface, or that maybe, could have a protection, or let's say a national interest for a lot of individuals who want that to be in the right hands, let's say, right? So it should be really interesting. Thanks for listening to today's rundown. If you liked what you heard, please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.